Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Workplace Therapy Podcast by Unity & Company. This is the show where we explore what it really takes to lead, work, and thrive in today's complex world of work. Today's conversation is one that I've been looking forward to for a while now because we're talking about something that impacts every single professional that I know, whether they realize it or not, which is resilience. It's a word we throw around a lot, but what does it really mean to be resilient at work? And how do high performers, the people who are often seen as the most capable, find themselves teetering on the edge of burnout? And to help us unpack that, I'm joined by someone whose work sits at the intersection of psychology and leadership, Dr. Marie-Hélène Pelletier. Dr. Pelletier is a psychologist, a business strategist, and a leading voice on workplace mental health and resilience. With both a PhD in counseling psychology and an MBA from the University of British Columbia, she brings a rare and powerful combination of clinical insight and business acumen to her work with organizations across the globe. A former senior leader in the corporate health field, including roles at Sun Life, Dr. Pelletier has spent over 20 years helping organizations, teams, and professionals to proactively manage mental health and build sustainable performance cultures. She served on the board of the Canadian Psychological Association and the International Association for Applied Psychology, and she's known for her dynamic keynotes delivered in both English and French. Her latest book is called The Resilience Plan, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. It was released last year, and it's distributed internationally by Macmillan. It's making waves for its refreshingly strategic and actionable approach to resilience, not as an innate trait, but as a skill that can be cultivated. So whether you're a leader, you're an executive, or you're simply someone who's trying to keep up with the pace of professional life, this is an episode that you'll really want to lean into. So I am so excited to get into it. Dr. Pelletier, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure for me, Scott, and please feel free to call me MH.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, MH. All right. So first question for you, just to kind of set the stage. You have both a PhD in psychology and an MBA. So what drew you to bridge those two worlds that seem very different on its face, right? Mental health and business leadership.
Yes, it actually just happened, Scott. What happened is I was doing my research, my PhD research. Now, here's the thing. It was now 20 years ago, and I was doing a research that was looking at the efficacy of psychotherapy via video. So, can we do this? That was a time before internet was fast enough to deliver video. There was no FaceTime, none of this. I had to use technology like 6 telephone lines to transmit video and audio data, the whole thing. So it required basically a lot of management, a lot of funding, because all of the technology, a lot of leading people without even having funds to pay them. So I had to have a team of volunteers that stayed with me for a year to have the stability in the research. A number of things that I realized after all this was done, I really enjoyed. So that's what then led me to taking that next step and continuing my training with an MBA, which I did part-time, thankfully, so that I could get my hands into the actual work, which I did and loved. So that's how it happened.
Well, what a fascinating journey for you. And it's one that really resonates with us at Unity & Company and on the Workplace Therapy Podcast, because those are basically all of the conversations that we explore, the intersections of leadership and what it means to fundamentally be human. So one of the things that, we've chatted about in our lead up to this podcast is this idea that high achieving professionals assume they're kind of naturally resilient. And you and I had talked about how that is kind of a myth, but where do you think that myth comes from, and why do you think it's so deeply ingrained into the business psyche?
I know. It comes, I think, from a number of directions, which is in part what makes it so strong. One is it comes from ourselves, because we've done things before. We've gone through very challenging moments and successfully gone through and got to a point where we see all these accumulate and we're thinking, well, look, I can do these kinds of things. I'm lucky and, it's part of who I am, or I just own it, whatever, but this is who I am. And then we've got people around us looking at this and saying, oh, Scott, you're the rock of the team. You're the rock of the family. You're the rock of the company. You always get through everything. You're so resilient. And so now you hear this, and obviously it's meant as a compliment. You start thinking, well, yeah, I guess that's it. So it's coming from inside. It's coming from outside. And then from ourselves, part of what happens is we get to a point where we're looking at all these moments of high resilience, demonstration of high resilience, and that's true, they're factually right and correct. The problem is in the logic of saying, given this, I will always be like this in any situation that comes forward, and I don't need to do anything about it. And that's not true for a number of reasons. The person we are today is different from the person we were early career. The level of demands we're facing today are different, the levels of demands we felt then. So in effect, we're using old data to sort of predict here. And the reality is that, no, we need to invest in it. It is a skill. It's almost as if we said, well, I'm very muscular and all this, and I therefore don't need to do anything about it. Well, no, if you do nothing about it, it will not stay like this, right? So you need to invest, really.
Wow. I think those are such great perspectives that you're right. As workplace professionals, we often lose track of over time. This idea that as we progress through our careers and we take on increasingly more challenging roles or increasingly more senior roles within the organization, a lot of us don't really sit and reflect on the idea that as you move through the stages, most of us start as individual contributors, where the idea is really to build our own technical competency and our own technical skill set. It's really based off of individual contribution and our own proficiency at something. And then, for a lot of us, you move into either increasingly specialized roles that require a lot more analysis, strategy, kind of free thinking, collaboration with others in order to make higher and higher levels of contributions. Or for those of us who go down a management track, what could be required of us is extremely different from what actually got us into the workplace to begin with. And so I think it's a really good call out that we as workplace professionals should really take time to take stock of what is it that work is demanding of me now, and how the circumstances environmentally within the workplace and maybe even outside of the workplace, what are the ongoing contributing factors to that. And the other thing I picked out of what you said is this idea of, and I'm going to use a different word than what you said, but this idea of maintenance. It's like you can't just build a bunch of muscles, be really happy with your physique, and then say, okay, that's it, I've arrived, and now I can just discontinue this activity or this maintenance moving forward. I think that's actually a really perfect analog. But I do feel that as we immerse ourselves in the workplace, as we get more and more senior roles, the temptation to think about maintenance as this kind of discretionary thing or this non-prioritized thing is really high, right? As work takes more and more of your bandwidth and more of your capability, it's very tempting to feel like I can't really invest the time there into maintaining me. I've got so many responsibilities, so many things I'm accountable for to other people.
Yes, very much so. And I would say one of the things that sometimes, now that leads to many other parts of this conversation, I'm sure. But a short reminder sometimes to think about if you find yourself in that situation where you're now in these leadership roles and it looks like the demands on your time, that people around you, the demands around you are so large that this is where you could put all your time, really. If you think of the highest level of leaders that you've had the chance to meet or even read about online or see online, but most of us have had the chance to meet some very high level leaders. They are doing these things. They are putting boundaries. They are taking care of their physical and mental health. And so that's sometimes a good reminder that as I'm here in this kind of role and moving to my next role or a similar role, who knows, people don't get into these roles and not just survive them, but bring their best to them without that continuous investment. It's there. So sometimes that's sort of the fastest way for people to say, you're right, I know this person, or I remember meeting this person. And yes, absolutely, it was clearly part of their very full, immensely busy schedule, but also a non-negotiable.
I love that. I love this idea. And what came to mind for me, MH, as you were talking about that, is the idea between like a hobbyist and a pro athlete. Right? I mean, you really don't achieve those levels of ultimate performance unless the entire ecosystem of what you need in order to bring your full self to the table exists, right? Otherwise, if it is a secondary priority to you, yeah, you might be okay on a pickup game of basketball with some of your friends, but you're never going to play in the NBA.
No, it's a good way to think about this. It's an overall part of what you need to do. And more people I work with, some will come proactively to say, my game, to stay with that analogy, but my game is going well. And what I want is to maintain this level of performance and get ready for my next role. And so what are my blind spots? What am I missing? What can I optimize even more? And part of what we'll do, yes, is look at, let's make sure we really have excellent visibility on your current context and the context that you're looking at for your next step, maybe the next one and a couple of next ones. Sometimes we need to look ahead a bit more to be strategic so that we can make decisions today, start setting up the brain and our overall self to be ready.
Yeah. That's such a great point. And it is something that I think will resonate with a lot of our listeners and a lot of leaders who come to this podcast for advice on how to grow in their leadership, because I love the word you use about how this kind of investment in who you are holistically, it's not selfish, it's necessary. And you use the word strategic. In your book, you talk about taking a strategic approach to resilience. So why don't we dig into that a little bit more? Because I'd love to know, what does that mean in contrast to traditional self-help or wellness advice? What does it mean to be strategic with resilience at work?
Thank you. Thank you for asking this, because that is exactly what led to writing this book. What I realized, it just happened. It was not like a conscious, let me bring up strategy in the context of resilience. What happened is I'm working a lot with professionals, leaders, entrepreneurs, high-level, senior individual contributors, these types of folks. And yes, sometimes they will say, MH, why would I clear out this portion of time during my day, this 5 minutes to do the thing that you're saying will make a difference? And then at some point, I found myself just using this analogy saying, okay, when we are in a full just business environment, let's say we have a new idea, product, service, a new fantastic next thing here to bring. Would we just say, wow, this is a great idea, let's launch it? Or would we say, this is a great idea, let's look at who else is offering this? How much are they charging for it? Who is buying it? What forces in the near and far future might impact the demand for this? We would do, I see you nodding, of course, we would do all these things. That is strategy. And then we would have our plan, implement, move forward, update the plan as it goes, all that. So this is the same thing here. The original approach is to say, okay, I want to increase my resilience. I need to do all the things. I need to exercise more, meditate, eat better, see friends, be in nature, all these things. And I don't have time for any of this. I wish that was true. I trust the research. And if by magic you could implement this in my life, I'd be very happy. But I don't have time. And so the difference is, all right, let's be strategic here as well. So you do want to bring your best to what you do. And so let's look at here being strategic, starting with, what are your values? What's most important for you in both your professional and personal life? That's going to be what anchors this strategy, something that's very personal to you. The same way the company here would not do this in the way that anybody else is doing it. They would be anchoring their strategy in our vision, our mission, our values, right? So same thing here. What are your values? What is your current actual context? What are I'm calling it your sources of demands, your sources of supply, both at work and personal, because demands don't have a lane. It's all in you, the same person, right? And then looking at literally doing the equivalent of a SWOT analysis, but that allows us to look at your context. Where are your strengths and weaknesses? What are the opportunities and the threats given your particular context? And once you know this, now you can identify your 3 pillars and the actions, equivalent of tactics, for your plan. But now they become yours. They're doable. You want to do them. They're scaled to a degree that makes sense given your life, your actual life today. And so then we can move.
I think that is such a powerful insight, MH. And what's so funny to me, reflecting on that insight and applying it to my own career as an executive, right? This idea of your sources of demand and your sources of supply, and taking a strategic, comprehensive overview of what are the challenges, what are your objectives, what are your priorities, what are your values that you can bring to the table. Within a business context, we as leaders and executives, this is a well-developed muscle when there's a strategic business initiative in front of us. And yet this key insight of applying that same level of rigor to yourself. And I really see this as not just yourself and your personal development, but also, I mean, basically any decision in your life. I mean, I'm a parent. I've got kids, one that's entering high school, one that's entering her preteen years. And one of the things that hit me as I was reflecting on what you're saying is just how useful this framework would be to analyzing my scope of contribution as a parent, analyzing our level of prioritization, because it seems like there are so many demands and there's not enough supply, in order to address those demands. And the last thing I'll say, just as a piggyback to all of the things that you mentioned at the end of your run there, that once somebody goes through all of these steps that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the plan itself becomes stickier, right? Because it becomes more customized and aligned to themselves, their own personal values, their own personal goals, their own limitations, and an acknowledgement of those things. And it really reminds me of the work by David Rock that a lot of coaches use, where he talks about the neuroscience of leadership and about how leading somebody to make their own individual connections actually produces stickier behavior in the future, because it's their idea. It's the combination of their insights versus just telling them, hey, these are the things you need to do, go execute on them. And I wonder just how much we as leaders are really kind of we're almost reverting to that check sheet type of structure for our personal lives, but then we're giving work the best of ourselves, and thinking about strategy and more comprehensive inputs there. And so really what jumped out to me in what you just shared is that we owe it to ourselves to take the skills that we've cultivated in the workplace and to apply it more broadly and with a broader lens to our entire lives.
Very well said. And I agree with everything you just said. It reminds me of a specific example where I worked with someone who went through the exercise of clarifying for themselves their values. And of course, as leaders, often at some point in our lives, we've done this kind of exercise. So, okay, fine, take a few minutes, but rewrite them down so you have them in front of you. This particular individual had in their values lots of things. They happened to love what they do. So they loved their work. They loved power, influence. They also valued health. They valued relationships, specifically their family relationships. So you reminded me of this with your example. And then they looked at all their sources of demand and supply, where their time is going. And it was 99% going into work, basically. And so that made them, and then of course, realizing, because I was sharing all the research about the importance of, in general, relationships for people around us and for ourselves, specifically for our resilience. And so for this particular individual, it led to one of their strategic pillars to be called relationships. And his specific action that worked for him, because his overall realization was, I give all my time and best self and energy to work. I value relationships. They're important for me. But when I get home, I've got very little, I think his words were, nothing left. So what do I do with this? It's not like he could change a lot of this. He had to keep doing what he was doing. But in his plan, so relationship became a pillar, because it was like, wait a second, I've done already too long without prioritizing this. I'm not going to quit my job. I still need to do all the things. Okay. So, but small shifts. So for him, it was one of his children was a morning riser, like he was. So in the morning, there was time with this child. So they could have that, that very precious time together. That's great. So there was an element of pay yourself first, so that there were relationships that he could invest in that moment. Let's do that. Instead of, say, rushing and preparing lunch and things at the same time as we're all eating, actually putting phone down and everything down, not for long. Actually, he was doing, I think, a couple of minutes, seriously. But there were a couple of minutes where child was sitting eating breakfast and he was sitting eating breakfast, which I know sounds obvious. Sometimes not something we do. Okay, so that was one. And another action for him was at the end of his day before leaving work was to take a pause. We've heard this before, especially in the context of pandemic, but to implement it, that he was in his setup, he was driving, but when he would park the car, he would take 1 minute, 5 deep breaths to just reset. Not long. Everyone has 1 minute. So these were examples of actions that he could take that made a difference. You build from this. It's just like a strategic plan at work, right? You implement the strategy and at some point you evolve it. You're ready for the next thing. That's what happened for him as well. But just changing that sends a completely different message, and to people around, but to him as well. That now, okay, I'm working to align with my values.
Yes. I think those insights are so powerful. And what strikes me about it, MH, is as you were telling these stories of taking time without access to your phone, sitting in your car, like taking time to ground yourself and center, it reminded me of my time as a leader, as an executive working for really high growth startups, right? And somatically, my body felt the stress of putting my phone, when you were just describing putting your phone away and not being accessible in the early morning hours where a lot of like work days are just really starting to reach a fever pitch of momentum, a part of me was like, I can't do that. That feels impossible. Or sitting in the car, like I remember driving to work and wanting to exit the car as quickly as possible so that I could get to my desk and, start work and start that productivity. And we have this saying in tech startups, which is sometimes you got to go slow to go fast, right? And it seems counterintuitive, but it really illustrates, I think, what you were saying, which is like, there are some things which will create pauses and spaces in your day, but making those relatively small micro investments up front actually puts the wind in your sails that enables more momentum throughout the course of the day and when aggregated over the course of your career. And I think, in our discussions together, these kind of counterintuitive insights that like feel almost wrong in the context of the workplace, but are ultimately really, really the only way that you can achieve top levels of performance. You're so full of these insights. So I'm wondering if you can pick another maybe counterintuitive insight from your book, The Resilience Plan, that tends to surprise readers or maybe clients that you're working with.
A couple of ideas. One actually related to what the example you were talking about right there, but it broadens to other areas as well, where sometimes we'll be always, so going from one part of the project or one project to the next, there's always the next thing that needs to happen. Either it's fixing something that we realize that is not working or just moving to the next edition or to the next piece. And one of the key things with optimizing our overall health and resilience as we go through from a psychological perspective is making sure we find moments where we acknowledge the good, the success, so that yes, we're moving quickly to the next thing. Let's just take, and literally is about 1 minute. Take a minute to realize this, let's go around the table and name the things we learned from this, the things that went well, the success we've achieved with this part of the work that we've just done together. Humans need this. AI doesn't, but humans need this. This is part of what makes us then think, this was successful, I can do this again. It builds our sense, the technical term of is self-efficacy, that belief that I can influence things. And as we, in a way, recognize it, anchor this, then we start adding the belief that maybe I can do this again. And maybe I can influence other things, not even things like this, but other things also in the future. So this is an example. It goes in the same direction of, well, we just want to move to the next thing. We don't want to invest in it. But if we do, it optimizes everything that's going to happen after. So we want to think about this. Talking about one of the areas that sometimes can be surprising and interesting, and I mentioned this in the book, is using conscious intention to change certain behaviors, but also using some non-conscious processes. And one I mentioned in the book is called priming. And priming refers to exposing our brain in advance to an image or a word that represents our goal. And we now know from research the image is even more powerful, but words will work as well. And basically what we're doing is just printing an image or a word, posting it at a place where our eyes will see it. And what it does is to use an expression you've used earlier in our conversation, but it adds wind in your sails. You cannot just do this and do nothing else and wait for this goal to be reached. But we have enough research to suggest that doing this might help. So, concrete example, let's say a lot of people I work with will tend to have very active recovery. Meaning they will go for a bike ride, a run, go to the gym, like they'll be active in their recovery. And it's great. We want to keep this. This is good. We also want passive recovery, moments where what we're doing is letting the brain calm down. Meditation, yoga, tai chi, these kinds of things. So, and most people will, again, like I see you nod and say, yeah, I wish I could do this. I can't. My brain is not listening, whatever. Not true. We can talk more about this. If that's the case for you, that means you need it just as much as everybody else. But one possible action, if you say, okay, fine, MH, I will incorporate gradual, starting very small, maybe with 2-minute meditation, and I will do that once a week, and it will be in this moment. So you see all the SMART goal type setup, you still want to do that. Research on that is still good. That's still true. And what you might choose to do is find an image of someone meditating and putting it somewhere where you're going to see it, on your fridge, on your bedroom door, just somewhere your eyes will see it. It just increases the chances that you will do it. That's another idea.
These are such great ideas, MH. And as you go through all of these, and I'm reflecting back on workplaces that I've been a part of, where I've either been a leader or somebody more junior in the organization, I've been reflecting and asking myself, wow, was there an opportunity for me to actually do these things within the context of those environments? And one of the things that I've realized that I'm coming up against is the answer for myself anyway is, well, it depends. Sometimes I've worked in workplaces where leadership was really fundamentally supportive of this idea of resilience and promoting resilience. Even if they didn't really have the vocabulary or the tactics to do it, they understood the importance of balance in people's lives. But they didn't really say, okay, balance is important, and here's how we're going to help support that balance so that we can build resilience. And yet, on the other side, I've worked in organizations that did kind of have that singular focus that, that really kind of ingrained in me this belief and this somatic kind of memory that productivity is king, right? And if you can't justify the output directly associated with what you are doing in this moment, then it's not going to be supported, and you're going to at least be questioned and judged for your decision to, I don't know, take a walk during your lunch break or take 10 minutes to meditate instead of working through your lunch, which might be the corporate expectation. So all of that to say, it really occurs to me that leadership sponsorship, right, having an individual leader or a leadership culture that supports resilience is a really important factor here. So for the leaders who are listening to what you're saying, man, this is great. I understand the value of this. I want to bring this to my team. I can see how this will help us to produce exponentially more effective results in the long term. How can leaders support resilience in their teams without just defaulting to generic wellness programs and kind of turning a blind eye?
Yes. Well, starting from what you mentioned just now, you want to know which programs you have access to in your organization and be able to mention them, speak to them. Like, for example, some organizations will actually reimburse or pay for certain meditation apps. And therefore, well, okay, I can save $200 instead of, for my yearly thing. So it's good to know these things because you can bring them up. It connects the organization's strategy with what you're doing. You're right. It probably is not enough, but if it's there and it works, we want to use it. And as a leader, that's kind of nice because you're connecting with the company, the organization's doing with what we're talking about here. So I would say if it's there and it makes sense, sure, bring it. The strongest way to send a message of support is modeling. Do and be seen as doing. So you're doing it and you share that you are. So if you are taking 10 minutes to meditate, or 5 even, let's say 5 at lunch, instead of just closing your door saying, I'm just going to eat for like 10 minutes and then I'll open the door again, you say, I'm going to close my door, I'm taking 5 to meditate, and I'm going to eat for another 10 or whatever duration you can afford that day. But you're actually calling it, you're not hiding it, you're not just doing it, you're expressing it, you're communicating about this. Sends a very strong message. It could be also even simpler than this. Someone asks you what you did over the weekend, and you went for a walk in the mountains, or you did something that is actually good for your resilience. And so instead of, oh yes, had a good weekend, I went for a nice bike ride, instead, had a good weekend, went for a nice bike ride. I know how busy this week is going to be, and I wanted to front load on my resilience. Look at this. Took me less than 30 seconds to say this, but now I've changed the culture. I've changed what's important here. What am I doing? What I'm therefore probably encouraging others to think about. And so these are simple, no cost, no additional time ways to influence this. Then you can build your own strategy on how you're going to do this. Look at how the team's doing. What else might we need? Do we want to create an opportunity for us to connect over small videos that we found online that we share for 2 minutes at our next meeting and have a conversation about? Do we want to connect on a book that makes sense? Could be this book. I did build my book so that there would be questions at the end of each chapter to encourage conversations, either self-reflection or conversations, but that's another way. Many books are built that way. I find this very practical and in a way that encourages conversation. It could be also, if you're wanting it to be even more connected to the actual work we do now, just giving you some range of ideas here, but it could be as simple as saying, you know what, let's invest even more on our resilience as a team. So let's connect today and think about, when is the next busiest moment we're going to have? Is it in 1 month from now where this project's come to a deadline? Is this the usual time of the year where we all know it's the dark period we just have to go through? Identify it and then brainstorm as a team. What can we do between now and then, 6 months in advance, 2 months in advance, long time in advance, to get us there in a better shape already, so we're not already at the bottom of our tank going in. So that can mean pushing some deadlines to after, changing some projects where we can. And then how can we do things differently in that period of time? So see now what we're doing, instead of being taken by a wave and having to survive it, and that's what we do every time and do it again. Let's see, can we get proactive about this? I'm telling you, often when I ask this question, sometimes initial reaction is, well, MH, nothing can change. And then I just say, well, let's stay there a bit longer. We might find a 2% that could change. And that is sometimes more than 2%. But even if it's 2%, now we've shifted to having some influence. And back to our self-efficacy growing. It gives hope to the team as well. It shows them that you're trying new things. You're being curious about the ways we can do all this better. And that will then increase resilience, individual and team.
Absolutely. I mean, you gave just so many high impact examples of things that you can do, large and small, in terms of time investment and effort. But one of the things that struck me about what you just said is, having experienced some of these things in the workplace myself, all of these things are extremely high impact, right? Even the smallest things on your list, which is modeling and explaining to your teams through your own behaviors and through your own levels of prioritization where your value set lies, just how empowering that is for the leaders, for the people who report up to you, to really kind of take ownership of their own kind of holistic resilience and how they bring that to work. So I really see the value and the importance of the leader is really shining through here in creating the space to grow resilience on the team. And the permission is really the word I'm searching for people to take a look at resilience as a worthwhile investment, and maybe not even a worthwhile investment, but as a necessary investment, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're on a treadmill that just will never turn off. Right. So I love the example that you gave of, as leaders, we happen to know what, the seasonality of our business is. And too often, in an attempt to appease our leaders, right, our executive team, we sign up for calendars that create almost no space for resilience and for reflection. But if we can kind of take the horse by the reins, so to speak, and say, let's look down the tunnel of time. I'm going to ask you guys, hey, we're in a really challenging environment here. I'm going to ask you for a really intensive sprint. But listen, we're not going to be on this treadmill forever, right? Because, in 3 months' time, we'll have a little bit more space to kind of explore these things. And when you create a habit and a pattern of doing that, then there's trust that develops there too, right? And I think that's a really effective way that leaders can really help to support this systematic building of resilience, not just for themselves, but across the organization. And the exponential impact to efficacy that happens when you do that across multiple teams, multiple individuals, can just be enormous.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. And this is important also because sometimes we think we are in an overall culture that does not support it, is not like this. All the salmon are going up in one direction and, oh my God, I'm here and I want to do things slightly differently. Individuals, we can influence it. As a team in this organization, we can influence it as well. And so it starts at all levels. It can start from senior leadership. It can start from all of us in the organization, wherever we're at. It will all create movement. I do want to say just a brief word also going back to what earlier you were talking about, cultures that are very supportive and then cultures that are not. They're just very much into just work all the time, 100% of the time. I've worked with individuals who were in that culture, who are still in that culture. And some of them who actually did burn out fully and recovered, came back to this environment, came back in. And sometimes I catch them before they get in that state, which is even better. Point is, sometimes we're going to be in that culture. And of course, the choices we make cannot be as radical because it will create so much tension and conflict that it's going to be more work than not even trying.
Right.
So
right.
We don't want to go that far. It has to be realistic given the context, right? But there are ways to be in that context of, and that's how it feels often. I'll say this and people are like, oh yes, it feels like all the salmon are going in that direction and I'm the only one trying to go in the other direction, or different fish for that matter. I mean, there's a reason why you still want to be there. There are things you also share in common with this organization. You're just not prepared to do all the things exactly the way all the other are doing it. And sometimes there are ways to find slightly different ways for you to be doing your thing in a way that will maintain and support your resilience long-term in a sustainable way, potentially more sustainable than the rest of the salmon jumping over here,
Right.
in a way that still is flowing. I'm staying with my fish and water term here, but that's truly the word. It's still flowing with this culture, and that's doable. Sometimes it feels like it's not. Like the entire culture is this way. I can't possibly do this. It's not working. Sometimes it's not, and you just need to go to a different river. But sometimes it is actually possible. And sometimes I'm on retainer with some organizations with their senior leadership. And so I can see how sometimes I can tell them there are other fish like you in this organization. Can't tell you who they are, but I can tell you that there are others. And the more they start looking and being curious, the more they realize, oh yeah, look, Scott does close his door for a few minutes a day. Still here, successful, everyone, like it's great. Oh, I'm noticing Amy does this kind of thing as well. Okay, so out of the 300, we don't have many that are doing things slightly differently, but some are. And that shifts. Frankly, we sort of need to do that for sustainability, but also as newer generations are coming in the workplace.
Yes. Oh, man. That highlights for me or brings to mind an example by Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote a book on change management called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And one of the things that they talk about that's so important is really looking for, with intentionality, what they call bright spots. Yeah. Right. So instead of focusing on this negative perception or this negative idea that the culture here is like fundamentally averse to doing these things, really kind of flipping the burden of proof and saying, where is this culture not averse to doing these things? What are the bright spots that I can look at? And how can I capitalize on those bright spots as kind of a first resort versus just shutting down conversation and investigation of whether or not this organization can and maybe could be supportive of it moving forward.
That's such a great example and it fits with even the name of your podcast, right? Because when we're doing actual therapy, part of what happens is sometimes shifting our perspective, going from seeing only the things that are not working to still see them, they're still there, and seeing the things that are actually differently working than this. So we broaden our perspective, right? And that helps in itself. And similarly, also another element of therapy is to try new behaviors and then test whether they're as impossible to do as we think they will be. And sometimes we'll think in this culture it's impossible to close my door for 2 minutes. You know what? Let's try 1 minute and see what happens. Nothing terrible happened. I was able to take 5 deep breaths. Look at this, right? We can test that. Let's bring this curiosity to look for what may be challenging our current perspective, because there could be opportunities there.
I love this. And the other thing that keeps coming back to me every time you share an example is just how we know this as leaders already. This is the strategic thought process by which we navigate our work. We just have a hard time applying it to ourselves. And we need somebody like you, quite frankly, to hold up the mirror and say, like, where can you take what you're already doing well from like strategic analysis and looking at things comprehensively and apply them to the problems that you're navigating in the workplace. So your book is full of these exercises and strategies. You talked about that earlier in the program, how you've designed it so that you can use it as a way to kind of engage your team and think through some of these things. So without giving away too much of the value here, can you walk us through maybe one tool that listeners could start using today?
Yes. And we can have in the show notes, if you want, actually a link to the worksheets that are connected with the book. They're free. They can be used without the book or with the book, so doable. But one of these worksheets is the one that I've probably received the most positive feedback about, is the supply and demand, basically. But you can create it right now, listening to us. So take a sheet of paper, 2 columns, supply on one side, demand on the other side. Now, the exercise is you start writing let's start with the demand side first. You start writing the demands you have at work. List your top 3. Then the demands you have at home, top 3. Then add as many demands as you can on both home and work. And make sure that you're not just writing the sort of difficult negative demands you wish you did not have. Remember to put the positive ones. You just got a promotion. That's positive. You just moved to a place that is your dream place for right now. It's positive. It's still demand. You're moving. Right? So these kinds of things, make sure you catch them. Then go on the supply. What brings you energy at work? What brings you energy at home? All the bigger and smaller ways. Oh, when I have a moment to make myself a tea. When I have a moment to catch someone in the coffee room and have a brief conversation. But whatever it is, you find these. And then just that often will start highlighting that usually what happens is people underestimate the demands and overestimate the supply. They think, I don't have that many demands, I'm handling them. And yeah, I've got tons of supply, I'm great. Well, then you start looking at the actual, it's similar to bringing your eyes to the financial statements. And now you get the information. You would never in a business say, oh, no, I'm fine, I don't need to look at financial statements. You want to see what's there, what's happening. Same here. And I would say this tool is one that often will set up people on different choices.
I love that exercise first and foremost. And I completely resonate with the tendency to underestimate demands and overestimate supply. And I think that so many high performing leaders actually are probably victims to that blindness, I guess. Yeah. And so I think getting it out on paper and allowing yourself to look at it can really help you to make optimization decisions, which is why we do these things in a business context. So I think that's such a powerful insight from your work with executives and your work with leaders. So I want to dig in a little bit more there, because you have worked with everyone from, entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 executives. So what's something that you've learned just about human nature through those conversations?
Wow. Well, I've learned, and we know this from research, but the potential for resilience, the desire to build that resilience is there. People see it. People agree with it. People are pushed to the limits. We will figure it out. I think what is helping us is to have that better visibility on the overall context. There's many things that will shape how we think about, in this case, resilience as humans. One of them is what we're exposed to. One of them is the movies, the redemption story where, it's this one individual who's going through this terrible situation who on their own without anything is coming out of it. That influences sometimes how we think about, well, as the owner, as the leader, I need to not say anything to my leaders. I need to be fantastic for my team, and I don't need anything because I don't have time for anything either. And no, that's not how it works. The importance of context, of connections, of looking at it in its entirety is extremely important. And when we do this as humans, that's when we optimize. And I say as humans because truly there's so many things that now can be done by AI. But AI functions in a certain way, that's great. Humans function also in a different way, and we need to attend to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing that distinction is absolutely something that is so important, that because we're just starting to, from a business perspective, integrate AI with our daily practices, it's a really important reminder for leaders looking to integrate both machines and humans in this way into their work environment about what are the unique capabilities of each and what are the unique demands of each, like what is needed to kind of support and sustain each of those structures. I want to shift gears a little bit because we've talked a lot about the work that you've done with leaders and just how applicable it is to so many aspects of our life. But I'm curious, was there a moment in your own career where you had to practice the very resilience that you teach others? And I'm interested in what that looked like.
All day, every day, Scott. Really? Yes, there has been phases where it was way more demanding and I've had to apply probably every single thing in this book, including some things I now know that I did not know then that I wish I did, because the book led to the additional research, and plus research also continued to evolve over time. But I would say, no, definitely trying to apply what is in the book there all day, every day, not always with success. That's the key thing, right? It's not like, even if you have a plan, do you follow it perfectly every single time? No, it's a guideline. It's informing your choices. And sometimes this may not be possible today. Okay, but it's the plan. So tomorrow I'm back at it. And if tomorrow also is not working, well, maybe the way this action was designed needs to be further adjusted to become something I can land. And so it is. And sometimes it's being aware of the context. I once had a client who came back and said, MH, I think I'm spiraling back out of my plan. I'm off track, basically. And okay, well, what happened? Well, I was actually able to build my plan and follow it and go and do my exercise 5 days a week. And I had been doing this successfully. Wonderful. And for the past couple of weeks, I'm barely able to do, I don't remember, like 1 or 2 times a week, something like this. And then they explained what was going on. Someone had changed on their board and there were lots of changes. And then I said, okay, wait. What would you say to someone who usually does 5 days a week and in the past couple of weeks did 1 or 2 things and had all these other pieces in their context? And then they said, well, I would say, that's great. That's amazing that you kept this. And that's it. That's how we need to adapt our plans. We need to be realistic with context. And that, when things change, the expectations need to be adjusted and then we go back because that's the plan.
Again, such a valuable piece of insight. And there's just something so powerful about the way that you blend these psychological concepts with business strategy and business acumen to really kind of give us a powerful and compelling rationale for why these things aren't just indulgences, but they're necessary to achieve peak performance. So I'm sure that you've touched a lot of hearts and a lot of minds today with leaders who are listening. And it occurs to me that there's probably a question that they're asking themselves, which is like, man, I am pumped by everything that MH is sharing on this. I want to bring resilience to my team or to my culture as a whole. So how can they start doing that? What would be your advice?
One option, I'll give you a few options. One, easy, you can do this today. It's low everything. It's very just doable. Is your next agenda meeting, you put an item that's called resilience. And all you do for this agenda meeting item, which will take you 2 minutes, is to say, I just wanted to remind us as a team how important this is for me as your leader and for all of us for our success. And that this is a topic that's on my mind. And I'll bring it back. Today we have a very full agenda. We'll move on to our next points. And I wanted to make sure this is on our radar. Look at this. Took me less than 1 minute, but sending a strong message because now it was written as an agenda item right here, right? That's a way to do it. Strongest will be to create your own plan and sharing it with others so that that modeling is truly one of the most powerful ways. You can consider getting a book. Could be this one, could be another that speaks to you, but a tool is helpful because it brings an outside voice to the conversation. It brings different perspectives. It's in effect actually very healthy because it's not all on you as a leader either to do all this. So that's another option. You could also go to your HR partner internally, your person in human resources, and say, hey, I want to do a bit more for my team in this area. Tell me what we have that aligns with what's already here in the organization. So you're just building on what they have. It may or may not be the most fantastic, maybe yes, maybe no. But just like in any strategy, if you're aligning with what's already there, you have a chance of even more momentum than just starting your own things separately here. So that could be another avenue to consider.
Yeah. I mean, that is a really full toolbox of really simple things that leaders can use and can do to get started right away. And my guess is there will be more than a few leaders who will be listening to this and saying, man, I would really like to work with MH directly to really get consultation about how we can implement this kind of systematic building of resilience in our culture across the organization. So if there are listeners who are interested in reaching out and working directly with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. You can find all my work on theresilienceplan.com, so that you can go there. You'll see what I do, the work, all of that. LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of things that can be easily shared. You can add your voice to the conversation. That will be related to resilience for individuals, teams, and organizations. So that's a nice way to both connect together to see if we want to work together, but also for you to add your voice to that conversation in that format as well.
Absolutely. Well, MH, thank you so much for spending time with us today and just sharing so many valuable insights with our listeners. And for everybody else, that's it for today's episode of the Workplace Therapy Podcast. A huge thank you to Dr. Pelletier for sharing such timely and important insights on resilience and performance. If today's conversation sparked anything for you, or if your organization is looking to create a culture that truly supports sustainable performance, then we at Unity & Company, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at info@unityandcompany.com. Or just learn more at unityandcompany.com. You can also access the show notes for today's podcast at unityandcompany.com. And as always, if you found this episode valuable, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could use a little bit of workplace therapy. It really helps us to get the word out. And until next time, thank you guys for listening.